Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Thursday, January 16th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 472 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. And today we've got some more New York Jets news to discuss here on the show. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. At the time of this recording, we are just 10 subscribers away from 500. So make sure to click that subscribe button. And as always, thank you to all those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms as well. Today, we've got some Aaron Rodgers news and quotes to get to, as it was a Pat McAfee show Thursday, not a McAfee Tuesday. It was a McAfee Thursday here for Aaron Rodgers. Spoke on his future a little bit, spoke on where things stand with him and the Jets. So we'll discuss that to open up the show. And I also want to discuss one candidate that the New York Jets are interviewing, and one candidate that has picked up some steam, or at least his name has been thrown out there a little bit more than some others, that I want the Jets to stay far away from. We'll get to that as well later on in the program. As always, though, before we begin, we got to tell you about our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS. Let's take a look at the odds for the next head coach of the New York Jets. Aaron Glenn at -150. He is the clear favorite. Brian Flores at +250. Jeff Ulbrich, which I don't see happening, but he's on this list, +300. And then Joe Brady, who really seems like a possible fallback option if Glenn and Flores don't happen. Jets maybe take a risk with the first-time OC. They're at +500. If you want to bet on the next Jets head coach, you want to bet on any of the wild card or divisional round weekend action coming up, NBA, NHL, any of the sports gambling action, check out BetUS and use my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek, if you're looking to get tickets to the best in entertainment or sports, anything that you can buy a ticket for, SeatGeek has it. Use promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase and get yourself out to some awesome events to kick off 2025. And also our friends over at Huga House. Tomorrow, they are releasing sweatshirts. So if you want to get any of their new arrival sweatshirts coming out tomorrow, or any of their awesome hats, check them out. And at checkout, use promo code BUBS for 15% off any purchase. And when you use that promo code on your first purchase, you'll get 30% off the second purchase. So check them out and get yourself some awesome swag. So here we go. Episode 472. Another day, another episode. It's the off season. Never a dull moment with this team. We know how it's been. The off season really is this team's regular season. Lots of news, of course, with the general manager and head coach search, and even more news today with Aaron Rodgers, as he spoke for the first time since the 2024 season came to a close 2 weeks this Sunday. We're going to get into a couple different quotes, but I just wanted to start here with just this first clip here from Aaron Rodgers, a minute-long clip that I wanted to play just on his thoughts on the Jets coaching search, some overall things on where he stands right now in the offseason, and if he's had any communication with the Jets since the season has ended. Here is Rodgers on where he stands right now so far in this offseason.
Let's talk about you and your retirement potentially. Hearing you talk about that football right there and chit chat about the move and what you see and what you like. And I think you've told us before, like, you're such a competitor, the only place that you really feel like you can scratch the itch of competition on a full-time basis is amongst the best, which is in the NFL. How much have you had to think and contemplate about your future? How much pressure is being put on you to think about that decision? And how are you managing that with everything that's going on back in Southern California? Legitimately, like, how are you as a person and how are you thinking about everything professionally? Because I assume there's a decision that has to be made.
Well, the season is not technically over. I always feel like the season's over once the Super Bowl's over. And then, kind of everything resets. Everybody's 0-0 again, and there's a chance for everybody to reset. Now, there's obviously moving pieces in New York. There's been a number of job interviews for GM and for head coach. There's even more names being released every day that the team is looking at. But I've had limited communication with them.
So there's Rodgers on where things stand right now. Limited communication with the team so far through this search, which is expected. Talked about the search feeling like it's growing every day, as he kind of mentioned. There are new names popping up every day, which has been the case. So that's just some of the first stuff. Now, some of the really important quotes from Rodgers came with involving some of his end of the season meetings with ownership, with Woody, Christopher, Jaime, and he even met with Ulbrich as well. And I wanted to say this, and Rodgers talked about this a lot today. He is still unknown whether or not he will play next season. That is still a complete unknown. But there was one common theme through this whole process, through this whole Aaron Rodgers interview today, that the New York Jets need to make sure they follow, and Woody Johnson needs to make sure happens, and that he doesn't get in the way of this happening. And that is the fact that the decision on Aaron Rodgers needs to come down to the new general manager and the new head coach, right? We've heard a lot of reports that him and Woody don't get along. Neither of them have publicly came out and said anything about it, but we've heard a lot of reports that the relationship isn't great, that Woody wants to move on. We've heard some reports that Woody doesn't want him back and could potentially force him to leave. There's also been some recent reports that say Woody is going to leave it to the general manager and head coach to decide, which is the way it should be. Here was the most important quote from today. I think everybody understand that it's going to come down to a general manager and a coach and myself, and whether we all want to do a dance together or if it's not in the cards. That's what needs to happen. It needs to be the football decisions, the football people making the football decisions, not Woody Johnson stepping in and making a decision off of his feelings or off of his relationship with Rodgers. Right? You need the football people, the new regime to come in and ultimately do what's best for the franchise. And as fans, you've got to hope that they make him. You've got to trust that they're going to make the right choice, whether that's Rodgers coming back or whether it's him not returning, whether Rodgers even wants to play. Because there is a chance he might retire. And even if the new regime wants to come back, he might not come back anyway. All of that we'll know here as the coming weeks, come ahead, get ahead here. And as we get on with this off season, and like you mentioned, the Super Bowl eventually ends and you start to move into free agency and all that stuff. And you really start to shape out what your roster is going to look like in 2025 with free agency and the draft and really the meat and potatoes of the off season and building this thing moving forward. Rodgers also talked a little bit about just some of the meetings he had with the front office and Woody. He said meeting with Woody was more team future related. He also said some other different things as well they discussed. He said meeting with Christopher Johnson and Jaime was more constructive things and how the team can improve, the process and all that stuff, etc. He said, quote, I had good conversations with all those people. And again, continues to mention he's not sure if he's going to play. And I'll say this. I don't think Rodgers returns. I don't. There is a part of me that's torn, but then there's also another part of me that feels a little bit stronger where you just look at how that last game went against the Dolphins and everything that happened throughout the entire game and even seeing him in the locker room now with one Jets drive when they posted their episode a couple days ago of him emotional in the locker room, crying after the game. It just felt like a very last thing moment for Rodgers. I know he walked off the field with Cobb in Green Bay and then came back, of course, in 2023, but walking off the field with Devontae, getting a win, hitting 500, putting up 4 touchdowns, kind of a good way to go out in what has been an otherwise miserable season for Rodgers and the team. I even say this too, in that game, right? It felt like every touchdown they held on to the football, right? They held on to number 500. Devontae held on to his touchdown. Brees held on to his. It felt like, and in the last touchdown, I believe Rodgers held on to it. It felt like every touchdown they were holding on to it just in case if it maybe was his last. So there was a lot of hints that was the end of the road for Rodgers, not just here in New York, but potentially in his career. And part of this whole Aaron Rodgers process could be who the new GM is, who the head coach is. If he likes the new head coach and the new GM hire from an outside perspective, he might want to come back. He might have a list of guys in his mind that he would want to play for. He'd be interested in potentially working with to see if the best route is to move forward with the team. But there's also probably a list that he thinks if these guys get hired, I'm done. So only time will tell. Another thing, too, with the whole Rodgers thing, and we've talked about this a little bit, but you talk about everything that will need to happen if Rodgers wants to come back, right? Because we could sit here and say, bring Rodgers back, don't bring Rodgers back. New GM and head coach should say, we want Rodgers, we don't want Rodgers. But there's a lot of things that are going to need to happen. And this is another reason why you might lean more towards him not returning, is because you talk about, okay, Aaron Rodgers is returning. What will he need to return on? Well, he's going to want to come back, first of all, and he's going to also want to play for the Jets. And, of course, the new regime's going to want him. That's number one. He will also need to learn a new system. He's also going to need to take a pay cut. So there are about 3-4 steps, right? New regime making the decision. He's got to want to come back. He's got to want to learn a new system, work with a new offensive coordinator, work with a new offensive staff. It can't be any more of Rodgers' buddies coming in here and running this place. Nate Hackett's gone. Lazard's gone. No more of the Green Bay connections here. It's got to be, he's just a piece of this team, not the leader of, not the main guy of this offense. It's got to be a collective effort. He's also got to take a pay cut because the 2026 cap hit is ugly, very ugly. He would need to take a pay cut. So there's a lot that needs to happen just from that perspective that would need to play out. And he has spoke publicly and said he would do all these things, right? He'd be open to taking a pay cut. He'd be open to mentoring a rookie. He'd be open to all these things. Part of that could be just publicly trying to make himself look good. That could be part of it, and put the Jets in a tough spot where whatever the Jets do, it makes them look bad and makes him look good. That could be part of it, but we'll see. Only time will tell. But ultimately, 100% takeaway that we could take from this, that every Jet fan could agree on, and Rodgers understands this as well, it's got to be the new regime that makes the decision. Nobody else. The football people that you hire have got to make one of the most important decisions you're going to make this offseason. Whether or not you're moving forward with Rodgers, and if you are, great. If you're not, who's your plan B? That's got to be decided by those guys, not Woody Johnson or anybody else that doesn't know a lick about football. So that's the Aaron Rodgers stuff. Now, I want to move on here to a head coach that got interviewed today. 2 head coach interviews today. Neither of them I really like. But a head coach that got interviewed today that I really, really dislike. And a guy that I wanted to talk about as just a candidate that no way can the Jets hire this guy, because he started to pick up some steam, right? There's been a connection there with the Jets dating back to last offseason, with him potentially coming in on the offensive staff. There's been some predictions recently from some NFL analysts that he's going to land the Jets job. And I just have to say no to all of it. And that's Arthur Smith. I will just say this straight up. If Arthur Smith became the Jets head coach, I don't think you can really come up with a way to lose season ticket holders quicker, lose fans lose attendance quicker than if you hire Arthur Smith. If you hire Arthur Smith, there will not be a single soul in that building to start the season next year. And there might not be a single soul at training camp. If the New York Jets hire Arthur Smith, as Joe Caporoso put it on Twitter, Jets fans might riot. You cannot make this hire. I don't understand the New York Jets obsession with Arthur Smith. I don't get it. And frankly, I don't really understand the NFL's obsession with Arthur Smith. Right? He was a hot name coming out of Tennessee, fine. But then he fails in Atlanta. He gets a gig right away in Pittsburgh, doesn't work out. And now or as an offensive coordinator, and now he's still getting interviews. I don't understand what it is about him. He went 21-30 in 3 seasons. He went 7-10 every single year. He missed the playoffs every single year. And it's not like the Falcons didn't have talent. They had talent. I mean, how many times did Falcons fantasy owners look at their fantasy lineup midway through the Falcons game and see no production from a Bijan Robinson, no production from a Drake London, no production from a Kyle Pitts? Because he never used any of his playmakers. Schematically, his offenses are so outdated. Look at what happened this year in Pittsburgh. Their offense was like watching paint dry, especially towards the end of the season. Once teams started to adjust to what Russell Wilson and that team was doing after they shifted to him over Fields. They ended the season losing 5 in a row, including getting blown out against Baltimore, where the offense no-showed until a slight sign of life in the second half. I mean, look at the way the offense is ranked under Arthur Smith. 29th in 2021, 24th in 2022, 17th in 2023. And this year, as the Steelers OC, they ranked 23rd in the NFL, one spot ahead of the Jets, who ranked 24th. I mean, you would literally be, the Spider-Man meme would be coming true here if the Jets hired Arthur Smith. It would literally be the same thing that we just saw, the same thing that we saw with Gaze, and that is an offense that's not good enough, a team that's got no accountability, no culture change, no way. No way. And I made an episode about this on Christmas Eve. 2 candidates that the Jets must avoid. 2 Adam Gase 2.0 candidates. I put it right here. For those of you tuning in on YouTube, here's my Jets head coach tiers. Gase 2.0, Arthur Smith and Matt Nagy. And honestly, I would take Matt Nagy over Arthur Smith. I would. Because at least Nagy made the playoffs twice in Chicago. None of it was because of him. They were all because of the defenses. And at least with Nagy, you potentially get Borgonzi as your GM. Right? I would say out of the coaches amongst Jet fans, that if I had to say, like, amongst Jets fans, if you had to get a poll of Jet fans, their least favorite coaches, like Ron Rivera would be on there, Vance Joseph would be on there. I would probably say Steve Spagnuolo would be low on some lists. I know some people do like the potential of Spagnuolo. And I would probably take Spagnuolo out of all those guys. If you told me you have a choice between Vance Joseph, Ron Rivera, Spags, Nagy, or Arthur Smith, like the unsuccessful retreads, I would take Spagnuolo over any of those guys. But, right, if you would have told me like Spags, Nagy, any of those guys, Arthur Smith would probably be at the bottom. Like, if I had to really think of my least favorite coaching candidate, it would be Arthur Smith. There's just nothing about him that even excites you. There's nothing about him that it's going to come in here and change this organization. There's nothing. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is there's been some predictions. There's been some talks that if a Flores and a Glenn don't happen, the Jets have had connections now for over the last year with Smith. It feels like the organization has liked him, right? They wanted to bring him in last year as an offensive consultant. I know a different staff, different regime with Saleh, but they're still interviewing him, so there's still obviously some interest there. I just don't get it. No way. I would take a Nagy. I would take a Spagnuolo. I would even take a Vance Joseph or even a Ron Rivera over Arthur Smith. Because, again, at least with a Spagnuolo or a Nagy, at least maybe that nets you Borgonzi. So you potentially like the GM, okay, hopefully he puts the coach in the right spots and builds a talented roster where the coach can, be successful that way. But Arthur Smith, serious? I mean, no way. No way can I do this. And it would be such an uninspiring hire. There would be no energy. There would be no excitement. At least with an Aaron Glenn, right, you can get excited about the potential. Brian Flores is a guy that did have 2 winning seasons in Miami. He's now worked under Tomlin. He's been the Minnesota defensive coordinator the last 2 years. At least you could say, all right, it's a guy that had 2 winning seasons. Yes, there was some things, but he learned from it. He's had a couple years off now. He's been under 2 really good coaching staffs, right? I mentioned the 2 Chiefs candidates. Maybe that nets you Borgonzi, a GM favorite amongst Jet fans. But Arthur Smith, I mean, what does he provide? Nothing other than his mustache. Nothing at all. So no way. No way. And especially, imagine Arthur Smith. You could not possibly draft a quarterback and let Arthur Smith lead the way. No way. No way. So I send this message. Woody Johnson's all about putting money in people's pockets, right? All about putting monies in people's pockets. And Woody Johnson's all about money being in his pockets. He's all about he's all about removing money from other people's pockets for spending money on this team that hasn't done anything for the last 14 years. But if Woody Johnson wants a hire that can sell tickets, wants a hire that can get the fan base engaged and ready, get the fan base excited, it's the Arthur Smith is not that guy. Arthur Smith, I think, would be the complete opposite. If there was a candidate that can completely deject a fan base, even more than it already is dejected, it would be Arthur Smith. 100%. Do not do it at all. Don't even think about it. I wouldn't even have interviewed him. Rodgers said it today about Mike McCarthy. Big Mike is one hell of a ball coach. That's what he said. I would interview McCarthy. They won't because there's too many red flags for some reason. I don't know how there's too many red flags on McCarthy's resume, but there's not too many red flags on Arthur Smith's resume, or there weren't too many red flags on Gaze's resume. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. I'm not going to sit here and talk about that. I already mentioned that in the episode the other day about this Jets coaching search, the parts of it that I don't like. But no way to Arthur Smith. I wanted to get that out there because he's a name that's been talked about more than others. All right, Glenn and Flores are the top two. Brady's been a name that's talked about often. Nagy and Spagnuolo get talked about a decent amount. And Arthur Smith's up there as well. A name that's been thrown around a lot. No way. So let me know what you think in the comments section down below. What are your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers' comments today and your thoughts on Arthur Smith, which I'm sure many of you are in the same boat as me. Stay far away. One interview is enough. Don't interview him again. Move on and find a much more qualified, better candidate than him, who did absolutely nothing in his 3 years in Atlanta other than get ran out of town. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. We'll have a lot more content coming your way, so stay tuned. And as always, until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.